The morning mist clung to the cottonwood trees like ghosts refusing to leave. Ayana moved through the camp with practiced silence, checking the perimeter as he had done every dawn for 3 years. The scars on his chest, hidden beneath his worn leather vest, seemed to throb with each step, reminders of the cavalry raid that had taken everything from him. His people's temporary camp sat nestled in a valley between rust-colored mesas, protected from the harsh Arizona winds. The smoke from the morning fires drifted upward, carrying the scent of sage and roasted corn. Children's laughter echoed from the creek where they played, a sound that once brought him joy, but now only deepened the hollow ache in his chest. That's when he saw her. She emerged from the tree line like a shadow given form, leading a limping horse by its reins. Her clothes were travel-worn and dust-covered, her auburn hair hanging in tangled strands around a face marked by exhaustion. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Ayana cold. It was something in her eyes when they met his across the camp. The woman froze, her hand instinctively moving toward her hip where a gun might have been, but her holster was empty. Smart, Ayana thought. No one approached an Apache camp armed and lived to tell about it. "I don't want trouble," she called out, her voice hoarse from dust and thirst. "My horse threw a shoe 5 miles back. I just need water." The camp had gone silent. Women pulled their children closer, and the men's hands moved to their weapons. But Ayana raised his palm, signaling them to wait. He walked toward her slowly, his moccasins silent on the hard-packed earth. As he drew closer, he could see the truth written in every line of her face. This wasn't a settler woman seeking help. This was someone running from something, or someone. The way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained, the haunted look in her green eyes that never quite met his directly. He knew that look. He wore it himself. "You are far from any town," Ayana said in clear English, learned from the missionary school before the world had turned to ash around him. "This is dangerous country for a woman alone." She lifted her chin with a defiance that didn't quite mask her vulnerability. "I can take care of myself. Your horse cannot." He nodded toward the mare, whose right front hoof was held gingerly off the ground. "She needs rest, food, medicine." The woman's composure cracked slightly. "I can pay. I have money." Ayana studied her face, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted toward the camp's exits. Whatever she was running from, it had shaken her to her core. And in that moment of vulnerability, their eyes truly met for the first time. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. In her green eyes, he saw the same sleepless nights, the same weight of memories too heavy to carry alone, the same careful walls built to keep the world at arm's length. She was wounded in ways that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with her soul. She saw it too. Her lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Mitchell. I am Ayana. It means eternal blossom." A bitter smile touched his lips. "My grandmother chose poorly." Something flickered in Sarah's expression, not pity, but understanding. "Sometimes names become what we make them," she said, "not what they were meant to be." The profound truth of her words settled between them like dust after a storm. In the distance, an elder approached, Nayeli, Ayana's grandmother, her silver hair braided with turquoise beads. She spoke in rapid Apache, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the stranger. Ayana responded in their language, his voice respectful but firm. Nayeli's weathered face showed surprise, then curiosity, then something that might have been approval. She nodded once and turned back toward the camp. "My grandmother says you may stay until your horse heals," Ayana translated. "But she asks why I would trust a white woman who brings the smell of gunpowder and fear." Sarah's hand unconsciously touched her throat. "What did you tell her?" Ayana was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman who had appeared like an answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. "I told her that sometimes the wounded recognize each other. 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. Sarah had been given a place at the edge of camp, close enough for protection, but far enough to respect the boundaries of trust that took time to build. She tended to her mare, Ember, with the kind of patience that spoke of long days spent alone with only animals for company. Ayana found himself watching her from across the camp more often than he cared to admit. She moved like someone always prepared to run, but her hands were gentle when she worked. When the children gathered courage to peek at the strange woman, she would offer small smiles that never quite reached her eyes. On the fourth morning, he found her by the creek where Ember was drinking, her head in her hands. The sound of her quiet sobs mixed with the rushing water, and Ayana felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built 3 years ago when the soldiers had come. "The dreams?" he asked simply, settling on a fallen log nearby, but not too close. Sarah's head snapped up, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment at being caught in such a vulnerable moment. "I don't know what you mean. You call out in your sleep. English words I cannot understand, but the pain." He touched his chest. "Pain speaks the same language in every tongue." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the gesture sharp and angry. "You don't know anything about me. I know you flinch when men raise their voices. I know you sleep with your boots on. I know you check the horizon every few minutes, looking for dust clouds that might mean riders coming." His voice was gentle but unwavering. "I know because I do the same things." Sarah's composure crumbled. "They came at night," she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "3 months ago. The Dawson gang. They said my husband owed them money from a poker game, but Robert had been dead for over a year. They didn't care." Ayana waited, understanding that some stories needed to be told in their own time. "They burned the ranch. They killed my foreman, who tried to protect me. And they—" Her voice broke completely. "They left me alive so I could remember what happens to people who don't pay their debts, even dead people's debts." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of water over stones and Ember's contented snorting. Finally, Ayana spoke. 3 years ago, the cavalry came to our winter camp. They said we had been raiding supply wagons, but we had been hunting deer in the mountains, miles away from their roads." His hands clenched into fists. They didn't care about the truth. They wanted someone to blame for their losses. Sarah looked at him fully for the first time since her confession, seeing the pain that lived behind his dark eyes. "My wife Itzel was heavy with our first child. She couldn't run fast enough when the shooting started." His voice became distant, reliving a nightmare he'd carried alone for too long. "I held her as she died, our son dying with her. And I lived because I was too much of a coward to die fighting for them." "That's not cowardice," Sarah said fiercely. "That's survival." "Is it?" Ayana's laugh was hollow. "Some nights I think the dead were the fortunate ones." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, two broken people sharing the weight of memories too heavy for one person to carry. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "The Dawsons are still hunting me. They think I know where Robert hid money that never existed. Every town I pass through, I leave quickly. Every stranger I meet might be working for them." She looked at her hands. "I haven't slept a full night since it happened." "Neither have I," Ayana admitted. "My people think I am keeping watch for enemies, but the truth is, I am afraid of the dreams." Sarah nodded, understanding perfectly. "In the dreams, we can't save them. In the dreams, we relive the moment when everything changed and we were powerless to stop it." A red-tailed hawk cried overhead, its call echoing off the canyon walls. Sarah followed its flight with her eyes, and when she looked back at Ayana, something had shifted in her expression. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Your pain is sacred to your people." "I'm just a stranger passing through." Ayana considered her question carefully. "Because for 3 years I have carried this alone, and when I saw you that first morning, I recognized the weight you carry. Maybe—" He paused, searching for words. "Maybe some burdens become lighter when shared." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. I don't know how to stop running. Perhaps, Ayana said quietly, you don't have to run. Perhaps you just have to learn to stand still long enough to heal. As if summoned by their conversation, Nayeli appeared on the path from camp, carrying a bowl of herbal tea and a knowing look in her ancient eyes. She spoke to Ayana in Apache, her tone gentle but insistent. My grandmother says the spirits have been restless since you arrived, Ayana translated. She thinks they brought you here for a reason. I don't believe in spirits, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Nayeli handed her the tea and spoke again, her weathered hands gentle as she touched Sarah's shoulder. She says the spirits don't need you to believe in them to do their work. They just need you to be brave enough to let them heal what has been broken. The turning point came during a thunderstorm that rolled across the desert like the wrath of ancient gods. Sarah had been with the Apache camp for nearly 2 weeks, and her mare was finally strong enough to travel. Everyone expected her to leave with the first clear dawn, but as lightning split the purple sky and rain drummed against the canvas of her shelter, she found herself paralyzed by more than just fear of the weather. She had grown comfortable here in ways that terrified her. The children no longer stared at her with wide eyes, but waved when she passed. The women had begun including her in their evening cooking, teaching her Apache words for corn and water and home. And Ayana had become her anchor in a world that had felt unmoored for so long. The storm reached its peak near midnight, and Sarah was jolted awake by thunder that seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. But it wasn't the storm that had wakened her. It was the sound of someone calling out in distress from across the camp. She wrapped her blanket around her shoulders and stepped into the rain, following the sounds to Ayana's shelter. Through the animal hide covering, she could hear him speaking rapidly in Apache, his voice thick with anguish. The nightmares had found him again. Without thinking, she pushed aside the entrance flap and stepped inside. Ayana was sitting upright on his sleeping mat, his chest heaving, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, despite the cool night air. His eyes were open but unfocused, still trapped somewhere between dream and waking. Ayana, she said softly, approaching slowly as she might a wounded animal. You're safe. You're here, with your people? He turned toward her voice, and gradually his breathing began to slow. Sarah. His voice was raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. I was back there, at the winter camp. I could smell the smoke, hear the screaming. Without hesitation, Sarah moved closer and sat beside him on the mat. Tell me about her, she said quietly. About Itzel. Ayana's eyes widened with surprise. What? In my experience, the best way to fight the nightmares is to remember the good things they're trying to steal from us. She tucked her legs beneath her, settling in for what she sensed would be a long conversation. Tell me about your wife. What made you fall in love with her? For a moment, Ayana looked as though he might refuse. Then something in Sarah's patient expression seemed to unlock something inside him. She laughed, like water running over stones, he said finally, light and musical and completely without pretense. She was the best horsewoman in 3 tribes, but she was afraid of spiders. A small smile touched his lips at the memory. She would call for me to remove tiny spiders from our lodge, the same woman who could break mustangs twice her size. She sounds wonderful, Sarah said, and meant it. She made me want to be better than I was, kinder, more patient. His voice grew distant. She said I worried too much about tomorrow and not enough about today. She was always right. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the shelter, a different kind of weather was clearing. Sarah found herself sharing memories of her own, not of Robert, whose memory had been tainted by the lies the Dawsons told about his debts, but of her childhood on her family's farm in Missouri. My father taught me to read the sky, she said, listening to the rain on the hide walls. He said clouds would tell you everything you needed to know about the day if you knew how to listen. When I was little, I thought he was magic. What happened to your family? Sarah's expression grew sad. Cholera, when I was 16. All of them within a month. That's how I ended up marrying Robert. He was the only one who offered me a way west, away from all those graves. You've been running from grief for a long time, Ayana observed. Maybe, or maybe I've been running towards something I couldn't name. She looked at him directly. Until now. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Neither of them moved, but something fundamental had shifted in the small space they shared. The Dawsons will never stop hunting me, Sarah said finally. And your people. They need you to be whole, to be their protector. I can't ask you to— You're not asking, Ayana interrupted. I'm offering. Offering what? To stop running. Both of us. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. My grandmother says that sometimes two broken pieces can heal together in ways they never could apart. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones she'd shed by the creek. These carried hope. I don't know how to stop being afraid. Neither do I, Ayana admitted. But I know I'm less afraid when you're here. Thunder rolled overhead again, but softer now, the storm beginning to move on. In its wake, the air felt cleaner, charged with possibility. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I haven't told you about the Dawsons. Ayana waited, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. They're not just hunting me for money that doesn't exist. One of them, he said he'd make me his woman when he caught me, said I belonged to him now that Robert was dead. Her voice shook with remembered terror and present rage. I won't live in that kind of fear anymore. I can't. Ayana's grip on her hand tightened, and when she looked up, she saw something dangerous flash in his dark eyes. They will not touch you, he said with quiet certainty. Not while I breathe. You don't understand. There are 6 of them, and they're killers. I won't have your death on my conscience too. Then we make sure it doesn't come to that. Ayana's voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the steel beneath it. Tomorrow, we talk to my grandfather. Atsa has been war leader of this band for 40 years. If anyone knows how to deal with men like the Dawsons, it's him. Outside, the last of the thunder rumbled away into the distance, leaving only the gentle patter of rain and the feeling that something had changed forever. Sarah realized she was still holding Ayana's hand. And more importantly, she didn't want to let go. Stay, he said softly, reading her thoughts. Until morning. The nightmares are quieter when you're here. Sarah nodded, settling back onto the mat beside him. For the first time in months, she felt the tight coil of fear in her chest begin to loosen. As sleep took her, she was dimly aware of the sound of steady breathing beside her and the revolutionary feeling of not being alone. Dawn came painted in shades of gold and rose, the desert air washed clean by the storm. Sarah woke to find herself curled against Ayana's side, his arm protective around her shoulders. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. She hadn't shared sleep with anyone since Robert's death, but then she remembered where she was and why, and the panic faded into something warmer. Ayana stirred as she moved, and his eyes opened slowly. The nightmares? He asked quietly. None for you? He shook his head, wonder in his expression. The first peaceful sleep I've had in 3 years. They might have stayed there longer, talking in quiet voices as the camp awakened around them, but the sound of horses approaching at speed sent them both scrambling to their feet. Ayana was out of the shelter first, Sarah close behind, her heart hammering with a fear she'd hoped never to feel again. 6 riders sat their horses at the edge of camp, their faces hard and travel-worn. At their head was a man with cold blue eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, Buck Dawson, the leader of the gang that had destroyed her life. Well, well, Dawson called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent camp. Looks like our runaway bride finally stopped running. The Apache warriors had appeared as if from nowhere, surrounding the intruders with weapons drawn, but not yet aimed. Ayana stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the riders, his own rifle held with casual readiness. You are not welcome here, he said in clear English. Leave. Dawson's laugh was ugly. Don't think so, Chief. We've got business with the lady. His pale eyes found Sarah where she stood behind Ayana. "Come on out, darling. Time to pay your husband's debts." "My husband owed you nothing," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You killed him for a lie." "Maybe so, but you're gonna make it worth our while anyway." Dawson's hand moved to rest on his gun butt. "One way or another." That's when Atsa, Ayana's grandfather, emerged from his lodge. The old war leader moved with the dignity of a man who had faced down cavalry charges and lived to tell about it. His weathered face was carved from stone as he spoke in rapid Apache to his grandson. Ayana nodded once and turned back to the riders. "My grandfather says you have two choices. Leave now, or we bury you in the desert and let the coyotes clean your bones." One of Dawson's men shifted nervously in his saddle. "Buck, there's near 30 of them, and they look like they know how to fight." "Shut up, Tommy." Dawson never took his eyes off Sarah. "We didn't ride all this way to leave empty-handed." "Then you'll die here," Ayana said simply. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact delivered with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced death before and found he wasn't afraid of it. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could feel the moment when violence would erupt, could see it in the way the warriors adjusted their grips on their weapons, and the horses began to dance nervously beneath their riders. "Wait," she said, stepping out from behind Ayana despite his attempt to keep her protected. "I'm tired of running from you, Dawson, and I'm tired of good people dying because of your lies." "Sarah, no," Ayana said urgently, but she was already walking forward. "You want me?" she called to Dawson. "Then come and take me. Just you. Leave your men out of it, and we'll settle this like civilized people." Dawson's scarred face split into a cruel grin. "You challenging me to a gunfight, darling, because I should warn you I'm mighty fast." "I'm not challenging you to anything," Sarah said, stopping about 20 feet from the mounted men. "I'm making you an offer. You take me and everyone else walks away. You don't, and you all die here today." "Sarah," Ayana said again, and this time there was pain in his voice. "Don't do this." She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw not fear but fierce determination. "Some things are worth fighting for," she said, "and some things are worth dying for, but this is worth living for." Dawson dismounted, his hand hovering near his gun. "Smart girl. Knew you'd see reason eventually." But as he took his first step toward her, Sarah smiled, an expression so unexpected and confident that it made him pause. "I said I was making you an offer," she said. "I never said I was surrendering." That's when Ayana understood. This wasn't sacrifice, it was strategy. Sarah had drawn Dawson away from his men, isolated him, made him overconfident. Now the leader was on foot, separated from his gang by 20 feet of open ground. What happened next took less than 5 seconds, but would be talked about around Apache fires for generations to come. Dawson went for his gun, his hand moving with the speed of a practiced killer. But Sarah was already diving aside, and Ayana's rifle was already coming up. The Apache warriors moved like shadows, their bows singing as arrows found their marks with deadly precision. When the dust settled, Buck Dawson lay dead in the dirt, his gun still half drawn. 3 of his men had fallen to Apache arrows, while the other 2 sat frozen on their horses with arrowheads pressed to their throats. "You have a choice," Atsa said in careful English, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Ride away and never return to this territory, or join your leader in the ground." The surviving gang members needed no further encouragement. They wheeled their horses and fled, leaving their dead behind. Sarah was still on her knees, where she'd thrown herself, trembling with adrenaline and the aftermath of terror. Ayana reached her first, pulling her against him as she finally allowed herself to break down. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "They're gone. You're safe." "We're safe," she corrected, her voice muffled against his chest. "For the first time in so long, we're both safe." That evening, as the Apache prepared for a ceremony to honor the victory and mourn the violence that had touched their camp, Ayana and Sarah sat together on the same fallen log by the creek where they'd first shared their pain. "My grandmother says the spirits are pleased," Ayana said, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "She says they brought you here not just for healing, but for purpose." "What kind of purpose?" Ayana was quiet for a long moment. "To teach us that broken things can become whole again, but only if we're brave enough to trust someone else with the pieces." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling for the first time in years like she had found her way home. "So what happens now?" "Now we heal. Together. And we build something new from what we've learned." He turned to look at her, and in his dark eyes she saw not just love, but the kind of deep, abiding peace that comes from finding your place in the world. "If you'll have me?" "For as long as you'll have me," she replied, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like rain and hope and second chances. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to the truth that sometimes the most broken souls create the strongest bonds, and that healing, when it finally comes, is always worth the wait. The autumn sun hung low over the valley, painting the cottonwoods in shades of gold and copper. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow as she finished hanging the last of the washing on the line, strung between two mesquite trees. The simple cotton dress she wore, dyed with native plants in the deep burgundy her Apache sisters favored, moved gently in the desert breeze. From the corral came the sound of laughter, bright, childish giggles mixed with Ayana's deeper chuckle. Sarah smiled, setting down her basket to watch her husband work with the young colts. At his side stood their son, Nish, whose name meant "he works hard" in Apache. At 4 years old, the boy was the perfect blend of both his parents, Sarah's green eyes set in Ayana's strong features, his father's patience combined with his mother's stubborn determination. "Carefully, little warrior," Ayana said in Apache, guiding small hands to properly hold the lead rope. "The horse must learn to trust you before you can ask him to work." Nish nodded solemnly, his child's face serious with concentration. He had been born into two worlds and moved between them with the fluid grace of someone who belonged wholly to both. The Apache children had never known him as anything but one of their own, while the occasional white traders who passed through the territory treated him with the careful respect they showed all of Ayana's family. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to rest on the gentle swell of her belly, where their second child grew. This one would be born in the spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and new grass. Nayeli, now nearing 90 but still sharp as obsidian, had predicted it would be a daughter. "The spirits are ready to send us a little grandmother," she had said with a knowing smile. The old woman emerged from her lodge now, moving slowly but without assistance, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. She carried a bundle of sage and sweetgrass, the aromatic herbs they would burn at sunset, in gratitude for another peaceful day. "The riders approach," Nayeli said quietly, her aged eyes fixed on the eastern rim of the valley. Sarah felt her old instincts flare, the automatic tension that had once meant survival. But these days, riders usually brought good news, letters from the Indian Agency confirming their land rights, or news from other Apache bands who had found their own forms of peace with the changing world. Ayana had seen them too. He lifted Nish onto his shoulders and walked toward the approaching dust cloud, his movements relaxed but alert. Sarah joined them, taking her husband's free hand in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The riders were Apache, young men from their sister band to the north, led by Ayana's cousin Chato. They dismounted with the fluid grace of people born to the saddle, their faces grave but not panicked. Chato embraced Ayana in the traditional way, then bowed respectfully to Sarah. In the 5 years since she had joined the tribe, she had earned a place of honor among the women, not just as Ayana's wife, but as a healer and mediator in her own right. Her knowledge of the white world had proven invaluable in negotiations with territorial officials, while her gentle way with traumatized women and children had made her a sought-after counselor. "Uncle," Chato said, using the term of respect for an elder. Though Ayana was only a few years his senior, we bring news from Fort Whipple. The new Indian agent wishes to meet with all the band leaders. He speaks of new policies, new treaties. Sarah felt Ayana's hand tighten slightly on hers. Change was always dangerous for their people, even when it came wrapped in promises of peace. "What manner of man is he?" Ayana asked. "Different from the others," Chato replied carefully. "He speaks our language. His wife is Navajo. Some say he might be trusted." Ayana was quiet for a moment, considering. In the years since their confrontation with the Dawsons, his role in the tribe had evolved. He was no longer just a warrior nursing private wounds, but a respected leader who helped navigate the treacherous waters between the old ways and the new realities. His marriage to Sarah had been controversial at first, but their obvious devotion to each other and their contributions to the tribe's welfare had won over even the most traditional elders. "We will go," Ayana decided, "but we will go prepared for any outcome." Chato nodded and accepted Niley's invitation to stay for the evening meal. As the young men tended their horses, Sarah found herself walking toward the creek, the same spot where she and Ayana had first shared their deepest pain. He found her there, as she had known he would. Nalnish had been left in the care of his great-grandmother, who spoiled him shamelessly with stories and honeycakes. "You're worried?" Sarah observed, settling onto their familiar log. "Change is coming whether we want it or not," Ayana said, sitting beside her. "The question is whether we can shape it or whether it will shape us." Sarah studied his profile, noting the lines that 5 years of leadership had carved around his eyes. He was 32 now, no longer the broken young warrior she had first encountered. The pain was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had been transformed into wisdom, compassion, and an unshakable determination to protect his people from further harm. "Remember when our biggest fear was learning to trust each other?" she asked softly. Ayana smiled, the expression transforming his face. "You mean when you were convinced I was going to scalp you in your sleep?" "I never thought that," Sarah protested, laughing. "Well, not after the first week. And I was certain you would disappear one morning, leaving nothing but hoofprints and regrets." "Look at us now," Sarah said, taking his hand and placing it on her growing belly. "Building a family, leading our people, worrying about treaties and agents instead of just surviving the next day. Do you ever miss it?" Ayana asked. "The simplicity of just running?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, when the political negotiations get complicated, or when I'm trying to mediate between the traditional women and the younger ones who want to learn English. But then I look at Nalnish, or feel this little one move inside me, and I remember why we stopped running. To build something lasting," Ayana said, "something that honors both our losses and our hopes." A red-tailed hawk cried overhead, the same species that had witnessed their first tentative conversations by this creek. Sarah watched its flight and thought about the strange paths that led people to their destinies. "Whatever comes with these new treaties," she said, "we'll face it together. All of us. You, me, the children, the tribe. We've learned how to be strong in ways we never knew were possible." Ayana brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "My grandmother says the spirits knew what they were doing when they brought you to us in that storm. Your grandmother is very wise. She also says our daughter will be born with your stubborn streak and my suspicious nature. She predicts a very interesting childhood." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like music. "Then we'd better prepare ourselves for some memorable years." As the sun set behind the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they made their way back to camp. The evening fires were being lit, and the smell of roasting meat and corn cakes filled the air. Children played between the lodges, while their parents discussed the day's work and the news brought by the riders. Nalnish ran to greet them, chattering excitedly about the stories his great-grandmother had told him. Sarah scooped him up, marveling at how solid and confident he felt in her arms, so different from the fearful woman who had stumbled into this camp 5 years ago. That night, as they lay together in their lodge with Nalnish sleeping peacefully between them, Sarah listened to the familiar sounds of the camp settling into darkness. Somewhere, a night bird called. Horses shifted and snorted in the corral. An elder's voice rose in a quiet prayer of gratitude for the day's blessings. "Ayana," she whispered. Thank you for teaching me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the pain in a way that makes you stronger instead of bitter." His arm tightened around her. "Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't mean forgetting the dead. It means honoring them by choosing to live fully again." Outside, the desert night settled around them like a protective blanket, and for the first time in her life, Sarah fell asleep without checking the exits or listening for the sound of approaching horses. She had finally learned the difference between safety and peace, and in this place, with these people, surrounded by love that had grown from shared understanding, she had found both. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the sound of Ayana's steady breathing and their son's soft murmur as he dreamed whatever dreams come to children who have never known fear. It was, she thought drowsily, the most beautiful sound in the world.